So anyways, glad you guys are here. What I always like to do kind of for week one is kind of just go over like some of the really the housekeeping type course stuff, and then maybe kind of just give like kind of a brief intro to kind of help guide you into the curriculum. Um, so anyways, about the course, if you haven't already, the textbook is if you haven't seen already, the textbook is free. You can access it via the O'Reilly site, and there have been some. I think they changed their site just a little bit. Now you have to click the "I already have an account," which isn't in the instructions. So if you haven't done that yet, just know that you have to click that "I already have an account" and then follow the instructions, and it should get you where you need to be. And I guess just as like you guys can throw it in the chat if you want, but of you guys, how many of you have already installed MySQL? Is there anyone who hasn't? Okay, there's one that has. 2, 3, perfect. Okay, I always like to kind of get a gauge for if there's any troubles there, but it seems like it's pretty straightforward. So we won't cover that in its entirety. So week one, really what we're going to do in week one is kind of get kind of set up really. We're going to kind of do like a little bit of an intro. And as you guys know, if you take an online class, there's like the icebreaker type stuff. You kind of have to do some of that kind of housekeeping type stuff. But for the most part, as far as the curriculum, a lot of it is just going to be pretty simple. Like in fact, our exercise this week really is pretty easy. Did you install MySQL database management system? Did you create a student user account? Have you granted their necessary privileges? And so on. So pretty easy quiz. Basically, our goal this week is to just kind of get set up and get comfortable. So we're good to kind of move forward from there. So kind of like general class structure. I'm going to skip week one just because it's got some extra stuff that can be confusing. So kind of the general structure for the way the class is going to work. Each week we're going to have some reading that we do. And to be honest, the book for this class is actually one of the better ones I've seen. I think it's actually one that is decent enough that I think I would recommend, as you have free time, maybe the week before, kind of like skimming the next like set of chapters and kind of getting like just familiar with the concepts. Obviously not one you need to like deep read, I don't think, depending on how you learn. I'm kind of more of like an action learner. So we have some reading, some material that way. Sometimes there's websites as well. And again, a lot of those are listed as reference. So I wouldn't say go website to website and read the whole thing. A lot of them are just listed as reference. So when it talks about preparation and reading, I would very much kind of skim that. And then from there, what I would do is I would use kind of the activities for the week to kind of guide my studies. And what I mean by that is because we have exercises and we have quizzes. And the exercises each week are kind of like hands-on like problems to solve, so to speak. Like some of them might be like, oh, write a query that does this, or something along those lines. The quiz is usually more questions from the book. And the quizzes are all open book. And so that's kind of why I say I would use those to kind of guide the reading. And then the last thing every week is every week we're going to have either a paper or a project kind of thing. And really most time it's a paper. So week 2, we actually kind of do like a project. But every week after that, we have a paper. And the papers are very much kind of like free form. So it'll kind of give you like a prompt, so to speak, but it kind of leaves it largely up to you, which I think is great. The only thing is you have to be okay with it not being very structured, which I like because it leaves it open. You can kind of do what you want. And in fact, let me kind of show you this one. So in week 1, it really kind of asks you to compare and contrast MySQL Workbench, which is a program on the computer that has buttons. It's called an IDE, versus like using a command prompt. So it really asks you to kind of compare and contrast those, which I think there's pros and cons to both. I think it's important to know both. And so yeah, I kind of use both day to day myself. But here's an example of what I think a good paper looks like, because there isn't a lot of requirement around it, other than, you know, put forth some effort. Really, that's kind of like all I ask. And as they say, like a picture is worth 1,000 words. So what I kind of recommend, there's a paragraph requirement. I think it's 3 paragraphs or more. And I think that, you know, adding like a screenshot. And so really like the best papers I see, and honestly, I don't think it takes as much effort to kind of like put the proof in the pudding, so to speak, and show why, back up your opinion or your statements with some sort of screenshot evidence or a snippet of code, so to speak. So like for this week, it asks you to compare and contrast the GUI versus the or the command line, and GUI stands for graphical user interface. So, you know, I show some screenshots like, oh, here's the command line. And then I say, oh, you know, here's the graphical user interface, and I kind of talk about it. So 3 paragraphs, you know, nothing too crazy. Really, it's just a matter of what I would kind of say, use what you learned for the week and kind of apply that to the prompt. And so, like, for example, usually the prompt correlates to what we're learning. So as you're going through the setup and install process, kind of explore a little bit and kind of get a gauge for like, when would this be useful? Why would this be useful? I would recommend reading the paper prompt at the beginning of each week, so you kind of have an idea of where you're headed, a point B, so to speak. So yeah, so to sum up, from week to week, you know, we're going to have those 3 things: exercise, quiz, and a paper. So exercise, quiz, paper. And what I would do is I would start by kind of taking a look at the paper, getting an idea for the prompt, skim the reading, and then from there I would use the quiz and the exercises to kind of guide, like, oh, where do I need to put more energy, so to speak? Because like when you do the quiz, you're going to be flipping through the book. I would use the quiz more as like a study session, because it is open book. And to me, that's kind of what that quiz is. It's more of a, hey, let me go do my research into the book, find the answer. So the quiz is not something that you do in 5 minutes unless you really commit a lot of things to memory. The quiz is something that I would take my time with and actually use more as like a guided study session. Does that make sense? Everyone's shy.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect.
Thanks.
All right. Yep. Cool. So yeah, that's kind of like the general structure of the course from week to week. So going back to week 1, because basically what these weekly meetings are going to do is I like to kind of just cover the weekly topic. So I try not to get too much into the weeds of like what the actual assignment is, because unless it's a challenging one. So sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but I really try to stay more of, hey, let's explore something that aligns with what we're learning, but maybe do it in a little bit different way. Just so that way it's less conceptual and a little bit more real. It's kind of what I like to do. So I kind of use that as a basis, but every week I kind of try to kind of sum up basically what we're going to learn. And just as an FYI, I have tons of recorded lectures, because I actually record every one of these. I've been teaching, I think, for 7 years now. And of those 7 years, the course has changed. So really there's about a year or so worth of these recordings that I've done. So I'll post links to those sometimes. In fact, like if something comes up and I can't do a recording on our scheduled day, I like to do them early in the week, so that way you kind of have what you need to get through the week. So if I can't for whatever reason, sometimes I'll post a past recording just so you can kind of get started, and then we'll do one kind of later. So I do record these, so you're always welcome to kind of come back and poke through them and rewatch them and such. But anyways, so on that note, yeah, let's get started. I'm going to dive into, well, one more thing before we dive into week one. Just to kind of keep it on your mind. I don't want to overwhelm you, but just kind of make sure you're keeping your mind open to maybe some options here. In this class, we have a final exam, which is your typical final, which is, just questions. But we also have a final project option. So you can actually pick to do one or the other. You'll get the best score from one or the other. You can't do both and take, half from here, half from there. You have to pick one or the other. You can do both and take the best score. But from my experience, almost everyone gets 100% on the final. Like as long as you give it a good shot on the final project, you'll get 100%. So I highly recommend the final project. Everyone who does it says that they almost learn as much from the final project as they do the actual course curriculum. So if you want to be proficient at this, I would highly recommend the final project. And honestly, I think it's easier because if you start on it as we progress through the course, it'll be easy. And we're not going to hit that till week 3. So no worries about it now. But starting in week 3, we'll talk a lot about the final project, but just keep it on your mind. All it is you have to design a database and build some resources around that. Some like documentation type resources. So if there's something that you think would be a cool idea, like maybe it's, oh, hey, I want to build this application that tracks recipes. Oh, I want to build this application that, lets people track I've had people do their favorite albums. I've had people that have kind of like build databases that would allow for like tracking of parent custodial stuff, all that kind of stuff. So if you have a good idea, keep that kind of in the back pocket for that final project. Okay, before I dive into week 1, does anyone have any questions about general course structure? I know some people popped in late. Oh, and one other thing, late work. I am kind of when it comes to late work, I like to run my class as if it were a professional work environment. So, late work is fine. I give full credit. The only thing I ask is like, communicate that in advance. Like if hey, I'm getting married on this week, some things might be a little out of whack, come in a little late, that's fine. Or like, hey, something came up, I'm sick, whatever. Just communicate that as far as in advance as possible and have that conversation. We'll be all set. So yeah, on that note, does anyone have any questions about course structure or anything like that? Any housekeeping items before we dive into week 1?
I just had a quick question.
Yep.
So you always want to start the paper very last after we did the exercise and stuff, when we skimmed through like the readings, and then you want to do the exercises and the quiz together, and then you want to do the paper last, right?
Yeah. So what I would do is I would take a look at the paper first thing, just to kind of know like, oh, this is what I need to keep top of mind. And then because usually, like I said, the paper corresponds with like everything else for the week. So what I would do is, knowing that like, oh, this is the prompt for the week, maybe if in my exercise I find this resource, or maybe if in my exercise I write this bit of code, I'll just screenshot it right there. So I would actually start like compiling your paper throughout the week. Like maybe it's just, hey, I'm just going to create the Word doc and throw screenshots in and then actually type it up later. But yeah, that's the way I would go. So I would finish with the paper, like as far as typing it up, but also I would take screenshots and stuff along the way just to save you some work. Cause a lot of times you'll be doing that along the way anyways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Yep, great question. Okay, let's dive into week one. So, like I said, week one is largely just about kind of getting comfortable and getting kind of set up. Is really the main focus. That's definitely my objective, but it's also kind of like catching up. So people always ask me like, oh, did I need to have taken CIT 111 before this class? And just so I know, how many people have taken CIT 111?
I did.
Okay, one. And if not, that's fine. So 2, 3. Okay, so we might have a mix. But anyways, CIT 111 I think is like a nice like ramp up to this, like to make it a little bit maybe easier. But I always teach those classes if you've never heard of a database before. So really week one is about kind of like wrapping our head around what is a database, how does all these terms, these basic terms we're going to use kind of work together. So like already you've heard of, obviously you've heard of database, you've probably seen the word SQL, MySQL, Workbench, all those kinds of things. So that's a lot of what this week is. And so I kind of want to just go over the reading as if I were going to do it, just so you can kind of get a feel, because week to week, this will be largely the same. So one of my favorite things to do when it comes to the reading is there's this really nice little PowerPoint here. And whoops, I did not want to download it. Every week there's this PowerPoint, and to me this is like the perfect summary. So when it comes to actually like reading the material, this is kind of like where I would kind of go. So you'll notice that it kind of like talks about what this PowerPoint's going to cover, but this is where I would start. If I was doing the reading, I would actually hit this very first, because I think probably 80%, if not more, of what you are going to kind of need to understand is here. Not saying that everything you need for the quiz is in here, but at least kind of understanding the concepts. I think this is the best resource. So I would kind of start here and kind of read through it. And if something like doesn't make sense to me, that's when I would kind of go to the book. So, like this talks about what a relational model is, and stuff like that. So I don't want to like go high depth into this, but this is where I would start. And if I had a question, I would, or like something that's like, oh, wow, I have like no idea what this is saying. That's when I would kind of pop over to the book. And then there's a couple other resources. And like I said, they're going to list all this stuff. And a lot of these are too much information, or it's just a lot to consume. So I would use those also as kind of like supplemental, like for example, like, oh, I need to install MySQL. How do I do that? Or, oh, how do I installed MySQL. How do I use the command line interface? Because I need to write a paper about that. And there's some nice little video tutorials there. And we're actually gonna cover that ourselves here in just a minute. But anyways, a lot of like your exercise stuff, like here's how you do some grants. This will actually walk you through creating your user. So I would do these things for sure. Because it asks about it in the exercise, if you remember, right? So when you go to do the exercise, just remember, oh, hey, this tells me how to do it inside of the reading. So like if you run into a question on your exercise or your quiz, maybe pop open another tab, just say duplicate tab, go in here and maybe see if any of these resources kind of give you a leg up on that kind of stuff, which in this week they definitely do. Okay, so that's kind of the reading. So now I kind of want to dive into, like I said, more of like the content. So we're going to deviate a little bit from Canvas here, and actually do more of like a lecture type thing. So like I said, you've probably already heard many terms already. So we have a database, we have MySQL, we have Workbench, and I kind of like to just like break all that apart and make sure we all understand what's what. And because there are a lot of terms that I've noticed through the years, like people don't really like separate well, and it can be confusing because, you know, MySQL and SQL, what's the difference between the two? So anyways, we're going to talk a lot about that. So anyways, what I like to always start off with is a database. What is a database? And a database is really just a place we put information. And when it comes to the databases that we are going to work with in this course, they're called relational databases. And so basically what it means is like we have tables, and we've all seen Excel spreadsheets. And that's what a table is. It's just like that. We have rows and columns, and all that kind of stuff. So it's not a foreign concept, so to speak. But the big kind of difference, and I'm going to kind of pull up this resource here. The big difference between databases and like an Excel spreadsheet is the way that we connect them together. So I'm sure we've all kind of like been in a situation where we're working with Excel, and you know, like let's say we want to be able to track multiple emails for a person, right? So you kind of see this example here where we have a first name, last name, and a couple emails. In this case, it's Frodo Baggins. You know, and let's say Frodo has 3 emails and we want to track all those. Well, in a spreadsheet, we might just add 3 columns, but you know, we are limited by how many emails we can add based upon how many columns there are. You know, we, as you guys know, we all kind of have a lot of emails these days. We have a school email, work email, personal email, maybe a couple personal emails. You know, so it's a real problem. So in a spreadsheet, we might do something like this. And spreadsheets are great for kind of shoehorning data into it, but we're constrained in what we can do. And databases are extremely powerful. So in a database, instead of having one table like this, where we list Frodo Baggins and all 3 of their emails, instead we separate the two, and we'll have a person table. And this has Frodo Baggins and Aragorn. And you'll notice over here, kind of like the key point behind all this is we have what's called a primary key. And again, we're going to talk about this in further detail, so don't stress too much. Just trying to explain why it's set up this way. And so we split up the person from the email. And so then in the email table, so 2 separate tables, we have a way we can list an infinite number of emails and tie them back to a person, because you'll notice that in the email table, we have this person ID. So for example, if I want to know, hey, what person does this Aragorn.Alessar Minas Tirith belong to? Oh, well, person ID 2. So if I go look at person table, person ID 2 is Aragorn. Bam. So we can connect all this data, and we're going to learn how to do that in this course. We're going to learn how to take, like, you know, 5, 6, 10, 20 different tables and connect all the data together. So we have one cohesive report, and we can be very dynamic about it. We can answer all sorts of data related questions by how we kind of pull the data together. And that's kind of what we're going to learn in this course. So the database itself is a service or a program that runs on a server, right? So when you hear the word database, think about a service that's running on a server. Now, that can be a little confusing because in this case, we've installed the database on your personal computers, and your personal computers are not really a server, but in reality, they actually have become one. So a server is really any computer that serves data or provides a service to a requester. In this case, your computer is both the server and the requester, because we've installed MySQL on there. And whether you knew it or not, that service is actually running in the background of your computer now, which is pretty cool. In fact, like if you're kind of going into development, you'll find that It's a great setup for a development kind of situation like we're doing now, because eventually we can deploy these databases to a real server. So anyways, to disambiguate more, so you have the database installed on your computer. And in this case, that database is branded as MySQL. So there's lots of different flavors of database, kind of in the genre of a SQL relational database. So we have MySQL, which is what we have installed, right? And MySQL is what I would consider like a brand or a product, right? Just like you have Apple operating system and Windows operating system. Well, we have MySQL database system. And then we have some others, such as Oracle database, right? So here's Oracle database. It's another flavor of SQL, of a SQL relational database. And then we also have Postgres, which again is a database. They're just different makers of databases. And then Microsoft has one, and it's called Microsoft SQL Server. And this is, you can see why people get confused, because in reality, these are largely the same thing. They're different spins of it, but just like we would say Mac OS, Linux, and Windows are all an operating system, we would say MySQL, Oracle, Postgres, and SQL Server are all SQL relational databases, or in layman's terms, they're all databases. They're just different kind of makers of one. And each one comes with kind of like a pro and con, just like Windows and Mac OS do. And a lot of it's just personal preference, and some of it's cost. So MySQL is completely free. Oracle is not. It is probably one of the most expensive. And they're kind of like the original database creator. Postgres is free and open source, and it's kind of considered the most advanced. And you know, I say that as I read it on there. It is the most feature-rich free database system. So MySQL is free, but to kind of fill you in on the drama, Oracle actually is the one that makes MySQL or maintains it, if you're familiar with open source nomenclature. So Oracle maintains MySQL. And so you can imagine that they're probably not super eager to make it as good as their paid product, right? Because why would anyone pay for theirs when there's a free one here? So Postgres, to me, is kind of the answer or the equivalent to the Oracle and the SQL Server. So SQL Server also is a paid product, and it's the Microsoft variant. All four are very good. I'm sure there's more. There's like MariaDB, but these are kind of the main ones, and I don't want to muddy the waters too much. But what's really cool, so in this class, we're going to be learning SQL or SQL. And really, SQL is like the language, right? It's the actual programming language that you use to interact with the database. And the nice thing is all of these have adopted kind of a standard SQL syntax. So even though we're just using MySQL in this class, once you learn it, you could immediately jump over to any of these others. So we're going to learn MySQL. Let's say you apply for an internship and they say, hey, you're going to be working with Postgres. You don't need to fret, because you can say, oh, like I've used MySQL in the past, so I'm familiar with SQL. So switching to Postgres will be pretty easy, right? And that goes for any of these, whether using Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres, Data, or Oracle. Any of them will work pretty much interchangeably, with just some minor differences in some functions and some different functionality, but largely the same. Like once you learn one, you'll kind of know them all. And that was a lot. So I'm going to pause there. Does anyone have any questions about all that word salad I just threw at you?
Not yet.
Okay, perfect. All right. So yeah, I wanted to kind of give that background to make sure everything's clear. So now we're going to kind of dive into the next layer. So now we're just in kind of like the MySQL world. MySQL Workbench is just like an application that we use to interact with the database, right? It's just a tool. So I have all these little connections here, and each one of these actually is a different database that I can connect to from Workbench. It's just a tool, right? And it says it right here. MySQL Workbench is the official graphical user interface tool for MySQL. So we can connect to any MySQL database from MySQL Workbench. So this is not like your database. It really is just a tool to connect to things. And then once we're connected, it kind of talks back and forth with the database to kind of populate it. So what I like to do, especially given that your task for the week is to kind of compare and contrast command line versus the graphical tool, I like to kind of walk through that. So I have this one right here. This is kind of my go-to. So I'm going to just go ahead and log in here. So here is mine, and I got some stuff here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just clear all this out. Get rid of you, get rid of you. So when we first kind of log in, this is kind of where we'll be. And again, you won't see all this. I just have a lot kind of already here. But you should have a Sakila here. And if not, no worries, we can add it pretty easy. But inside Sakila, this is our database. And each one of these actually is kind of a separate database, or you'll also hear the word schema. And they're pretty much interchangeable. When you hear schema and database, for the most part, for right now, just think of them as the same thing. But each one of these in here is a table. So you can see here, we can click on tables and kind of see a list. Now, what I like to do, if I click back on this little home tab in Workbench, I found that no matter what operating system you're on, the easiest way to get to command line is to right click on your connection here, and it'll say start command line client. And no matter what operating system you're on, it'll work, which is pretty grand. And then you just got to type in your password. And just so you know, even if you don't see it type, it's typing. It just doesn't put anything there for security reasons. So I typed, nothing changed. If I hit return, it logs in. So don't be panicked if you're like, oh, I'm typing my password, but nothing's happening. It is. It's just not going to show you. So anyways, once I'm here, we can kind of let's compare these. So on this one, I can kind of show a list of all my tables. And here I can use a command called show databases. And here's all my databases. You'll notice that this list is actually identical, right? All the way through. And we want to use Sakila. So on the graphical user interface, you know, I can just kind of like tap this down. I can also, here, I'm going to say use Sakila because it's a little, like I said, it's just a little bit different. So we'll use Sakila. And here I'm just going to use that same thing, use Sakila. That's the database we want to use. And you'll notice it says database changed. And now, like I said, I want to see all the tables. So in the graphical user interface, we can just hit this little caret next to the tables, nice and easy. Here I can say show tables. And again, we'll notice that this list is identical, right? Just a list. Just one is like one that we use buttons and click on with our mouse, and on the command prompt, we can only use our keyboard. So just a little bit different. So anyways, that's kind of like as you're browsing, that's kind of how you do it with both of them. When we're done in the terminal, you can just type exit. So right now we're at this MySQL little prompt. If I type exit, it closes. So I'm just going to go back here, just show you again, start command line client. We're back here. I'm going to say my password for this database is School Rocks. If you already know your database, we could just say use Sakila, just show it again, show databases. There's my databases. I want to show or use Sequila. We have to pick which one we want to use. Then once we're in that database, then we can show tables. Cool. And then finally, the last thing, like let's say we want to see, oh, we have this actor table. What's in the actor table? And these are the columns. So we have an actor ID, first name, last name. And I can do the same thing here with what's called a describe command. So if I describe actor, and you can write it all out, so describe actor, or you can do it short, DESC. I'll show both. Same thing. And we can see the same thing. So let me make this a little bit nicer here. There we go. And you can see we have the same thing here. Now, this is where I think you really start to see some of the benefits of the command line, right? Is we can see a lot more information in kind of like a single view here than kind of what we get from the sidebar. Now, that being said, we can kind of hit this little, if you hover over the table, there's a little wrench icon. We click this and we can get a little bit more kind of similar views. You'll just notice that it's a little bit not as self-explanatory. For example, primary key is just abbreviated with a PK and a checkbox. And this one, says under the key. So a couple differences there, and that's kind of the bulk of your papers, kind of to go through those and kind of take a look. Now, we're not going to get to it this week, but just to kind of show you like a default, what's called a query, we can see what's inside this table. So select everything from Sequila, or from actor, sorry. We're going to select everything from actor because we want to see what's inside that table. Now, in the GUI or in Workbench, you'll notice that there's these little lightning bolts. And there's one that has a little cursor on it. That's my favorite one because it only runs one. If you hit the one without that, it's going to run every command that you have in this file. So I use the one with the cursor because it just runs one. And once we run that, you'll see this is all of our actors. We have, and you'll recognize some of the names, but they're obviously not real names. But we have Nick Wahlberg. So yeah, that's kind of how it looks there. Let's do the same thing here. Select everything from actor. And similar kind of look. Right, so we can kind of explore that way. So I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to like overwhelm you. But you can kind of get a feel for navigating around your database just by kind of, I like to say, explore and poke around just by doing this, and just to kind of give you kind of an idea, and this is where you can kind of fill in with your paper. But it's pretty easy in here to kind of poke around without kind of knowing what you're looking for because it's all kind of listed out here. We can very easily say like, oh, like what tables are available, what columns, and very quickly kind of like expand and kind of poke around, or even see two at the same time to say like, oh, like how does film actor relate to film and actor? We can kind of pop them all open and take a look, right? To say, oh, in film actor, there's a film ID, and in film, there's a film ID. And oh, and in film actor, there's an actor ID, and in actor, there's an actor ID. So you can kind of connect the dots just a little bit. Whereas in the command prompt, it's a little bit more, just like anything command line, you got to know what to type, which for beginners can always be a little bit more challenging. That being said, however, there are some things that you simply cannot do in Workbench. So it's important to know how to utilize the command line because there's some things that you just must do on the command line. The other benefit in my mind to command line is oftentimes we're connecting to servers, right? And maybe something happened and we can't connect with MySQL Workbench for X, Y, or Z reasons. And we just need to jump in on the server itself and just really quickly kind of do something, fix it or whatever. So anyways, any questions around Workbench? Does everyone understand the difference between Workbench, MySQL? Just to reiterate, Workbench is just the tool we use to connect to MySQL. It's just an application. But does anyone have any questions about like the terminal, Workbench, or anything like that?
How do you make Workbench dark mode?
That is a good question. I'm on Linux, so it does it automatically for me. So I'm not sure on other things.
Okay,
So yeah,
No
not
problem.
sure. Yeah,
there's a Stack Overflow. I just looked up, but I didn't read through it because
I
you were
do
talking.
know.
But
Yeah, I do know that there inside of preferences, there's ways you can, in fact,
yeah, I looked at it and I couldn't figure it out. But
I
you
will
have to know
say
exactly which thing you need.
yes, and I will say that you can mess it up really fast.
Exactly.
Um,
It said to change the XML and stuff, so I'd have to figure out where to even get to that. And I might just say white is fine. So
Yep.
thanks.
Yep, no problem. All right. Cool, great question. Any other questions? MySQL Workbench, command line, anything really? All right, I'll take that as a no. So anyways, I just, I like to keep these meetings under an hour. That's always my goal. I hope they're helpful. I've been told they are, so anyways, that hour mark is kind of where I like to keep it because we have to cover so much in that amount of time, but I think it's worth it. But anyways, so if you have any questions throughout the week, if I'm sure most of you here are already on Teams. If you're not on Teams, feel free to jump on. That's kind of where I like to do my main kind of communication. So every week I like to send out an announcement. I'll send out another announcement with the weekly recording. But really I really like Teams because as people have questions, they can ask them in the general chat. You can also DM me if it's like sensitive, but I really like if you have a question, don't be embarrassed. Feel free to ask it in the main chat because odds are there's someone else who's having the same problem or maybe has had that problem and already solved it. I mean, we've already seen that once with like the book stuff where someone's like, hey, I can't access the online book and someone like solved it. And everyone benefited from that. So if you have a question, feel free to ask it in that general chat. And then I will answer it as quick as I can, and other people may likely chime in as well. That's kind of like what I think is like a great kind of classroom interaction. But anyways, good luck this week. If you have any questions, feel free to put it on Teams or shoot a message to me. But good luck this week and let me know if anything comes up.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.